This was the most failed military operation in the United States since the Civil War, and in order to eradicate the cult, the two sides faced off for 51 days, and the FBI even dispatched tanks and planes to encircle and suppress it. But in the end, more than 80 people were burned alive. May 1992, the ATF, or the Bureau of Explosives at Tobacco, Alcohol, Firearms, and Firearms, received a phone call from the chief of police in McClellan County. And he said that a courier guy was delivering to Mount Carmel in the departments around Texas, and he found a package revealing firearms, grenades, and black powder, and the recipient was a member of a local Christian Nova faction, a member of the Branch Davidians. ATF actually asked a group of men in their 30s and almost 40s to disguise themselves as college students to secretly investigate. These college students are also talents. They don't care about the time they appear, whether they meet the course time of college students wandering around the Branch Davidian camp all day long. In the end, there was really a successful infiltration of the Branch Davidians, however, when David Corey, the leader of the Branch Davidians, saw through his identity a long time ago. But he didn't take him seriously and never debunked him unexpectedly. This agent actually found something. There are at least 150 weapons in the residential area where the Branch Davidians are located that included 40 to 50 boats of heavy machine guns, plus 8,100 rounds of ammunition. And although it was legal to own a gun in Texas, we usually joked that since childhood, the United States was shooting every day. But this large number of people was obviously able to affect local law and order, and that was absolutely not going to happen, so the ATF was ready to wipe out the Branch Davidians February 28, 1993. The ATF launched a raid codename to collect them, and a group of more than 50 people came to the Branch Davidians, and they thought it would be a quick battle, and if they could seize the opportunity and then promote the heroic image of the ATF troops, wouldn't it be a two-pronged deal? So they deliberately notified the major media and reporters before they set off, and asked them to go with them. But what everyone in the ATF didn't expect was that this operation was surprisingly not going well, and a reporter got lost on the way to the scene and happened to see a postman. So he went over to ask for directions. I kindly told the postman that today the government is going to raid the David Reef in Mount Carmel. It's not safe here. You should leave quickly. But I didn't expect that this postman was one of the core members of the Branch Davidians, David Jones, and when he heard the news, he rushed back to the camp without saying a word and notified the Roasted Thunderstone. And after hearing this, the Roasted Thunderstone immediately made a deployment, and he ordered the male Christians to occupy the favorable terrain and arm, let the women and children hide in the room, and he himself was in charge of negotiating with the ATF. And this agent who was lurking in the Branch Davidians also sensed that something was wrong while everyone was in a hurry. He escaped from the Branch Davidians. Then, the agent quickly found the commander of the ATF and told David that he was ready to defend against a surprise attack when he was in Corps, and he didn't know the deployment of the firepower that David called according to the idea of our normal people. Since the enemy has been exposed, then we should cancel the operation and wait for a suitable opportunity to make a move. But the ATF commander ordered a strong attack, and then 3 helicopters were used as an air attack, and 2 trucks full of special attacks called for David, although the operation was exposed. But the ATF still covered the truck with canvas when more than 50 people came to the Davidian camp. They were dumbfounded, and if they really fought, they probably wouldn't be able to bargain for a little bit. This building is only 2 floors, but there are a lot of windows, and there is a tall tower in the center that can be looked out, and this structure is very suitable for the people inside to monitor the outside. And the outer perimeter of this building is still a plain as far as the eye can see, and there is no bunker at all. All in all, this is a fortress that is easy to defend and difficult to attack. When the ATF agent came to the door suddenly opened a crack, and a head peeked out from the inside, and this person was none other than the sect leader David Corley, and he looked closely outside and then silently closed the door. So there were heavily armed ATF agents on one side, and the Davidians, who were not only heavily armed, but also had a favorable terrain, and the two sides were at a stalemate, and then suddenly several gunshots rang out and a fierce exchange of fire began. There are different opinions as to who fired the first shot. The ATF said it was a Davidian, and the Davidian survivors said it was the ATF, and there was a report that the ATF killed one of the Davidians' dogs first. In the aftermath of the investigation, an ATF broke down the door and said to the agent that it was worth thinking about, and he initially said that the ATF fired the first shot, but during the formal interrogation, he suddenly reverted and denied this statement. And in addition to the statement, a Houston lawyer had investigated the scene, and he found that there were multiple bullet holes in the right door of the shootout, and based on the characteristics of the bullet holes, it was determined that this was fired into the house from the outside, and the government only took out the left door with 2-way bullet holes, and said that the right door was gone. And a Texas cavalry also said he saw 2 people carrying away the right door with his own eyes. This makes people suspect that the disappearance of the right door was deliberately done by someone in any case. This is a shootout broken by ATF Star Motion ATF. The agents have numb scalps. I don't know whose walkie-talkie suddenly came out of the fuck. The machine gun agent's fire was completely suppressed. Not only that, grenades were thrown out of each window. The scene was even more lively than the new year at this time. The 3 raiders took a ladder and reached the window on the west side of the roof, thinking about touching into the house. Suddenly several huge gunshots rang out, and when they turned their heads, they saw that the tower had a gun barrel sticking out, and at that moment, a powerful Barrett sniper rifle, and the agents on the roof and on the ground were suddenly a live target, and the bullets passed by, and they had to find cover and return fire, and soon there were casualties. At this time, the ATF ammunition was gradually exhausted, and the encirclement was sufficient, and they had no chance of winning any longer, ATF player Zach Hosmer recalled afterwards. Several ATF officers tried to make peace with the mines several times, but they were brought back by artillery fire, and in the end, with the mediation of the magistrate, the two sides reached a ceasefire agreement. The exchange of fire lasted about 2 hours. 4 ATF players were killed and 20 were injured when David was in Corley. Ray was hit by bullets in the wrist. 6 Davidians died. 2 of them were killed by their own people. You see, there are pig teammates everywhere. However, the outrageous thing is that because the ATF was overconfident about the operation before departure, they did not arrange an accompanying ambulance, which led to the fact that they had to call in the radio vehicle on the scene and the agents who were originally aggressive. The only way to do this is to carry the wounded into the car, and all of this is captured on camera, and it is broadcast on television, and the whole country has witnessed their failure, and this dilemma has disgraced the agents, and they even have the impact and scattered the fire, and finally the ATF agents escort the wounded out of the scene, and the backs can only be described as embarrassing. So what kind of organization is this Branch Davidian, which can be exchanged with ATF-1 and even beat ATF to the ground? And why did dozens of people be burned alive in the end? American Christianity is very strong, and Davidianism is a Protestant denomination, and in 1959, Florence Hodov prophesied that Jesus Christ would come a second time, and at the same time, he called all the members to wait patiently on Mount Camia, but apparently this language failed, and control of Mount Camia fell into the hands of Benjamin Roden. And after his death, his wife, Lois Roden, continued to run it. Fernahauer, who later became David Koresh, was born in Houston, Texas, in 1959 when his mother gave birth to him at the age of 14, and his stepfather was a criminal who, according to Howell's ex-girlfriend, was called mentally handicapped by his classmates when he was in school and was sexually assaulted and abused. When I was 13 years old, my peers were still reading comics, but Howell was already memorizing the Bible and trying to do an in-depth analysis, and James Tarbor, a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, listened to Howell's 50-hour recording and then said, "I've never met anyone who knows the Bible better than I do, except for Howell, who was 20 years old and hallucinated after smoking Malaysia. And since then he has believed that he can communicate with God, and he has become more and more extreme in his religious beliefs." In 1981, a friend mentioned to him that there was a Lady Lois near Vico, known as a modern-day prophet, and Howell immediately went to visit. At this time, Lois was 67 years old and Howell was only 22 years old, although the age difference between the two was nearly 50 years, but this did not stop the intimacy between the two, and they formalized their relationship after that year, and perhaps this was how Howell controlled the sect. In January 1987, Lois died, and Howell tried to gain control of Mount Camia by force, and at this time, Lois's son, George Roden, dug up an urn from the cemetery and challenged Howell to see who could resurrect the dead, who would be the heir, and Howell called the police directly, saying that George had desecrated the body, and you should come and arrest him, and 9 months later, the county attorney refused to charge because there was no evidence, and on November 3rd of the same year, Howell and George had a shootout, and about 20 minutes later, the shootout ended in Howell's son died, but he was also taken away by the local sheriffs and charged with attempted murder. The jury argued over whether Howell was guilty or not. The case was deadlocked March 21st, 1988. While Howell was awaiting trial, George was not idle, and he complained about the court's delay in convicting Howell, and repeatedly hurled insults and even threatened the court. How could the court tolerate such a provocation? And sure enough, he was soon arrested, and was also charged with contempt of court. Shortly after George's arrest, Howell was acquitted and subsequently paid off Mount Camia's debts and gained legal control. He first preached a set of ideas about the imminent end of the world in the church, and told the followers that he was God's chosen one, that he was their final salvation, that all non-believers would be killed, and that he and his children would build a David hospital to rule the world of the future, and that the believers would hear it, and that they would be filled with the tragic vision of the end of the world, and that they had completely lost the ability to think for themselves, and that they would take Howell's words as a guideline, and that he would be whatever he said. At Carmel Manor, Howell was definitely a dictator. As the sect grew, Howell's control over his followers became more and more perverted, and he even restricted them from eating and sleeping. When it comes to going to the toilet, discussing what they eat, what they read, what they think is entertainment, where to travel, it can be said that Howell has complete control over the minds of these believers. So when Howell ordered the separation of men and women, sexual intercourse is forbidden, even if it is a husband and wife, and no one raises objections when they say that only they can marry a wife. And many women believe in Howell's doomsday lies so much that they are proud to have sex with Howell, and even deliberately save until the end of Howell's Bible study in the hope that they will be chosen, and that it would be better to have a child for him. Howell had some peculiar sexual fetishes. He lowered the age of marriage for women to 12, married 14-year-old Karen Doyle, and Karen's 12-year-old sister Michelle, and even molested 10-year-old Kiri, according to Howell. His goal was to be the father of 24 souls. And in order to appease the men, Howell promised that if they were submissive to him, he would arrange a perfect permanent partner for them in the post-apocalyptic New World. And these men also trusted Howell very much and willingly gave his wife. The daughter gave him only the expectation that Howell would have a perfect wife for him. And in the end, Howell took a total of 11 wives and bore him 17 children. On May 15, 1990, Howell changed his name to David Koresh for some unknown reason. And in 1992, Koresh militarized the entire Carmel estate on the grounds that the end of next year was approaching, and the congregants began military training at 5:30 a.m. every morning, during which they also read the Bible for half an hour, repeatedly watched war movies such as Field Cards, and deepened their impression of the war. Corey not only built underground bunkers and lookouts on the estate, but also spent $200,000 on armaments such as AK-47 rifle submachine guns, machine guns, grenades, large leather bags, parts and components assembled into explosive devices, ordnance, etc. In addition, he considered the possibility of fighting a protracted war, and hoarded a large amount of food and water, of course, all of which were voluntarily given to him by the faithful. As he said, on February 28th of the following year, the end of Davidianism came. The ATF came to Carmel Manor, and in the rain of bullets, the Davidians left people dead. But the other party didn't get any bargains, and 4 died because a law enforcement officer died, and the FBI intervened in this matter. But I didn't expect that even if the FBI intervened, this encirclement and suppression operation was very unsmooth, and in the end, more than 80 people were burned alive, and the FBI and other relevant law enforcement agencies were violently attacked. Even then, President Clinton was once questioned. Several FBI officials took the women and children in the camp hostage, and on March 1st, they changed the goal of the operation from investigating the unauthorized modification of guns to rescuing the hostages. At first, the Branch Davidians were able to contact the local media by phone, and they themselves were interviewed by phone, but for the next 51 days, the FBI cut off all contact with the outside world, and they had to communicate with the FBI negotiating team. Shortly after the FBI intervened, Koresh made a compromise that he agreed to leave the estate as long as the radio played a recording of his home. But shortly after the recording was played, Koresh repented on the grounds that God told me to stay and wait. Despite the change of heart at the time of Corey, he released 19 children and 2 adult women through the efforts of the negotiating team. And since then, the FBI and the ATF have done all sorts of tricks, first to break down the enemy's psychological defenses from within, and they have recorded videos of these children and sent them to the Davidians. It's about the children playing happily on the grass, and having each child say a few words to their loved ones to show that the children are being taken care of. And it really works because a mother sees her child so helpless. Poor and scared, very worried, motherly love got him out of the camp. His name was Kathy Schroeder, one of the core members of the Branch Davidians. This was a big breakthrough for the negotiating team, because they could use Casey to understand the composition of the camp. Even the deployment of firepower, which can effectively reduce casualties. If Casey had been properly housed, maybe more people would have come out of the camp, but they didn't do it. You would never have imagined. As soon as Casey walked out of the camp, this group of smart people handcuffed Casey and put him in prison clothes, and then they charged him for attempting to murder a number of ATF agents. And at the same time, they also made a very demoted statement. And if Casey's charges were confirmed, then all the cultists who came out of the camp would be prosecuted. Who would dare to come out? Who the hell came up with this idea? It's outrageous. Open the door. Outrageous. It's outrageous. The efforts of the negotiating team were all in vain, and although they were very angry, they still had to continue to deal with Koresh, but it didn't work, and they were sprayed by an angry Koresh on the phone. And in the meantime, Koresh's mother also came to the scene, and she also brought a lawyer, hoping to persuade Koresh to surrender, and it did have some effect, and Koresh finally promised that some more people would be released on March 21st. And as things unfolded, the FBI gradually divided the conservative and the radical, and the former was represented by the negotiating team insist on resolving the conflict through negotiation. The latter believes that the problem should be solved by force, and in the face of the stalemate, in order to force these disciples to come out, Ji Jingkai used some jaw-dropping methods without consulting the negotiating team. Knowing that there were children in the camp, they still played all kinds of noises day and night, even the screams of the rabbits when they slaughtered them, so as to make the disciples lack sleep. On the periphery of the camp, the FBI arranged for 9 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and 5 M728 engineering combat vehicles to patrol and wantonly destroy the exterior of the fence and the Davidian vehicles. And when it hurts the kids, the FBI head says that the Branch Davidians are fanatical religious elements and that they are very unstable, and that this is the only way to suppress them, and yet it doesn't understand that the FBI is doing a series of actions that will only make these unstable elements more unstable. At that time, the onlookers and the public almost overwhelmingly rebuked the FBI negotiating team into despair, thinking that no one would come out of the camp again. But to everyone's surprise, Koresh still allowed 11 people to leave the camp on the 21st, perhaps out of a promise to his mother. But these people were arrested again as soon as they came out, and one of the children who was also accused of murder and was released said that they would prefer to stay with Kors, which made it difficult for the negotiators, who apparently did not think about the religious issue of the Davidian leader in advance. Some religious scholars have suggested that the FBI's strategy against the Branch Davidians is too aggressive, that these believers are likely to see the FBI as part of an apocalyptic catastrophe that needs to be confronted, and that religious beliefs are so profound to believers that they are willing to die for their beliefs increase the likelihood of violent conflict. When it became clear that the situation was getting worse, the new U.S. Attorney General, Janet Reynolds, proposed a solution by force and reported it to then-President Clinton, who was more conservative in his thinking, and he suggested a siege plan, an indefinite blockade of David, a harder, patient, and proper solution to the problem, and 0 casualties. But Reynolds insisted that children could be abused and sexually assaulted at any time, and that millions of dollars were being consumed every week, so assault was the best option, and Clinton agreed to the assault plan. On April 19, 1993, the 51st day of the standoff, the FBI began to attack, and at the same time opened the gates of hell. And the FBI first blew up the outer wall of the camp with armored engineering vehicles in order to release CS tear gas into the manor and force the bomb to surrender, and the FBI agents told me that Coley was sexually abusing children and beating babies, and we had to get them out of here. But the FBI agents denied that they had reported this information to Renault, and it was obvious that Renault was really trying to get rid of David. And as the chief prosecutor, he lied in public regardless of his face. In the process of releasing tear gas, the FBI also used a megaphone to shout inside, "We don't use weapons, you don't shoot, what kind of nonsense is this? You blow up people's houses, throw tear gas at people, and tell people not to fight back. Are they not angry? You take people for fools, these people are not vegetarians." And they immediately picked up the guys and shot wildly outside the window, and the FBI's response was a trick to increase the poison gas. However, the FBI continued to drop tear gas for more than 6 hours, but none of the believers came out. They really stole iron, and during this time, the FBI used up the tear gas they brought and asked the captain of the Texas Mounted Police to provide material support to continue the delivery. At 12:07 p.m., there were 2 obvious fires on the front side of the building. One was the second floor on the left side of the front door, and the other was the front and right side of the building, and then the back side of the building also started to catch fire because the wind was very strong that day, and the building was almost all wooden, so the fire spread very quickly. And the bad thing was that because the structure of the building was destroyed, the people inside couldn't get out even if they wanted to. At 12:12, someone called the fire department, and the Wake Fire Department and the Belmead Fire Department each sent 2 fire trucks to the rescue, and the FBI was worried that the ammunition in the camp would explode, so the fire trucks were denied entry when they arrived. In the next 10 minutes, there were multiple explosions in the building where the Branch Davidians were located, and the building was also collapsing, and some witnesses said that there were gunshots at the scene, and the FBI confirmed this and said that the ammunition was fired on its own when it was heated. 12:37, the fire engine enters the fire and starts to put out the fire, and the fire is gradually brought under control. But the entire manor is still burned to the ground, and only a frame remains, and in the end, only 9 of these believers survive, and the other 76 people, including David Coor, have been confirmed dead. At this point, the 51-day Vic massacre finally came to an end, and together with the 6 ATF agents and 4 Branch Davidians who had been killed by the shooting, a total of 86 people died. After the event, 3 Branch Davidian survivors and 60 relatives of the dead will be Clinton. Attorney General Reynolds and senior officials of the FBI and ATF took the case to court and claimed $300 million in damages. There are many reasons for this tragedy, and although the source is David Cowley, the ATF and the FBI are also to blame, and they have exacerbated the tragedy by some irrational decisions and brutal actions. So the American law enforcement agencies have received strong criticism at home and abroad. Chief Inspector General Renault and then President Clinton issued statements and publicly apologized, saying that they would be responsible for the incident. ATF Director General Stephen Higgins and 5 other officials in charge resigned. On the 2nd anniversary of the Vic massacre, a violent explosion occurred in the federal government building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people and injuring more than 800 people. Defensive violence and offensive violence. Defensive violence refers to the building or land that believers cling to isolate them from the dominant culture in the Vic conflict in 1993. The Davidians demonstrated this concept. There are also many works adapted from this event. For example, the game Far Cry 5, the final boss of the game is a David created by the core stone man. He firmly believes that the end of the world will come. This is the end of the case. For more cases, please pay attention to Inspector Onion. We'll see you next time.